Aine Mannion, who is an activist with the We're Not Leaving Youth Community Campaign and a researcher for the group's policy document on housing, All Mall Commons, to give you maybe a brief background on ourselves and then your presentation on it.
Okay, so thanks everyone for coming along. The report that's kind of mentioned is specifically looking at the private rented sector. It was a report we did in We're Not Leaving. So what I'm going to try to do today is to look a little bit more at the broader aspects of housing in Ireland today, or accommodation in Ireland today, across different forms of tenure. I suppose sometimes when we're talking about housing in Ireland, we can look only at the broad things, and then some other people only are looking at the specifics. And I think what we're trying to bring out between the two presentations are aspects of both of them, because we have to be aware of the global causes, but we cannot forget the impacts that they are actually having in our communities. The structure of what I'm going to say is just going to follow the same as the discussion document. So that's pretty much setting out the problems, looking at a few of the causes, and then setting out what are some of the solutions that we could have. And I'm going to be running like two different computers, so bear with me if I start getting confused. So just to start, I suppose, with the problems. The mortgage problem has been one of the most well-known kind of problems bubbling in and around the surface of Irish politics for the last 7 or so years. And according to the last census, just under 70% of the population are homeowners. But that's a pretty misleading figure, because about half of that number are actually mortgage holders. And having a mortgage is not quite as secure a means of tenure as people were led to believe. We know, according to the most recent data, that 16.5% of current mortgage holders are in arrears. 12% of the total, not of the 16, are in serious arrears. So that means that over 90,000 households are in arrears of over 3 months. Now, the problems in the private rented sector are the ones, I suppose, I'm quite interested in, because that's a sector I can't get into at the moment. And for a lot of people, it's a sector either you're being kicked out of or you can't get into. And I think really for a lot of the media and the policymakers, they've only actually started even thinking about the private rented sector in the last 12 to 18 months. Tenants face multiple issues, such as illegal deposit retention by landlords on a mass scale. I mean, it's the largest issue that the PRTB has to deal with. We also have a failure to meet minimum standards. Threshold, the housing charity, has said that as a consumer, you would be better off going to a restaurant for health and safety standards than actually in your own kitchen. And then also there's the problem of lack of security of tenure, and that can be having really short leases, having no leases, or the massive issue of rent increases. So as you can kind of see in the discussion document, between 2012 and 2014, rents rose €150 on average in Ireland. In Dublin, it was €300. So then obviously Lorraine has spoken quite a bit about the issues within social housing, so I won't go into them too much. But then there's, as well as the issues that people who are already living in local authority housing face, there's the issue of people who can't get to it either. We currently have 90,000 households who are on the waiting list for social housing. You can see here the rise in the numbers. We know that about 3/4 of them are currently in the private rented sector. Others are relying on friends or family. And we know that 1/5 of people who are waiting for social housing have been waiting for over 5 years. That can't be that right time. Okay, so those are some of like the biggest problems that people kind of face at the moment. We know that let's come back. What the issues that these problems have caused in our day-to-day lives, they mean that, for example, young people cannot actually get housing. We cannot get accommodation. So you see over half of 20 to 24-year-olds, a quarter of 25 to 29-year-olds, and a tenth of 30 to 34-year-olds are still living with their parents. That was at the last census. It's quite likely to be a larger number now. We also know that there's been a huge increase in homelessness, especially amongst families. So one weekend in October, the Irish Times reported that there were 421 adults and 680 children in emergency accommodation in Dublin. And these problems exist there without even going into the problems of traveller accommodation, that the impact that that accommodation can have on the health and education, or the fact that local authorities underspent between 2007 and 2012 by 50 million on money that was allocated for traveller-specific accommodation, or the fact that we currently have over 4,000 people living in direct provision. They're called the residents of the Reception and Integration Agency, and those people are living on €19.10 a week per adult, or I think €9.50 per child, in shared accommodation, in accommodation that is not as suitable for people, really. So I think we know what's happening. We want to know why it's happening. And really the arguments of a lack of oversight, management asleep at the wheel, we all partied, or moral failings on a national level, they've all been well and truly rejected. Like, nobody actually believes them anymore. But just shouting capitalism is not really a satisfying answer for most people who want to understand why this is happening. I think we do need to look more at the processes that are going on and that have been going on for the last 40, 60 years or longer than that. And others who have started looking into this, a lot of it I think pushed along by Conor McCabe and the work that he's been doing on this. As you can see in the discussion document that's there for you at the end of the room, I've kind of set out 4 overall topics that I think have caused the current problems. So they are overemphasis on construction, privatization, speculation, and corruption. And really, if we're looking at the first one, which is overemphasis on construction, really construction has been used over the last 60 years to cover up for massive deficiencies in investment and in employment. And when the crash happened, it wasn't the people who'd been creating these policies that had to suffer. It was the people who were working in construction and the related industries. They suffered the largest drops in employment, and we know from the UCC report on emigration that construction workers were the most likely to emigrate in this recent movement of emigration. Then we have privatization. Now, one of the most obvious forms of privatization has been the sale of local authority housing, which, as you can see, is still going on to this day. But as Gavin was saying earlier, we have a massive transfer of public wealth to private pockets. 32% of tenants of households in the private rented sector are supported by rent supplement. So that is private landlords who are making money out of what should be social housing. And of course, then again, to mention direct provision, we know that there are companies that are making ridiculous amounts of money out of human suffering. And then I really don't want to get stuck on it, but there's, public-private partnerships, which have been shown to be, like, apart from the fact all the relationship with corruption and all these things, but they do not work. They waste money. They're completely inefficient. And in Construction 2020 and the social housing document from just before Christmas, they're mentioned as a great way that we're going to fund construction in the next decade. Now, I don't want to go into speculation too much, as I think the session later on that's looking at urban community will be looking a little bit at that. But this is a fantastic graph from Michael Taft at Unite's notes on the front, which really shows the blue up here is new house prices over the last 20 years. The other 2 lines are average wages and house construction costs. So it really shows a complete divorce of house prices and anything that was actually happening in the economy. And this, again, can't just be blamed on everyone went mad. There was somebody that was making money out of this. And what we really need to be doing, as I suppose we're going forward from this, is to figure out who was this and, well, how do we jail them, if possible, at a minimum. Then, of course, there's corruption, which we don't want to talk about. That happened a long time ago, or it happens in other places. Like, it happens in Italy, it happens in Greece. It doesn't happen here anymore because we just don't want to talk about it. And luckily, I think Anne Finnegan is going to be going into that a little bit more, so I'm saved from any solicitor's letters. So those are, I suppose, the reasons that like the general causes. But I suppose the one thing that's kind of missing out of it, everyone kind of does talk about these different issues, but what we really need to be looking at is finance. It, I suppose, ties all of these together, and I suppose is allowing each of these to happen as well. When we talk about finance, we need to look really at the growing place that finance played in the economy, in the Irish economy and the global economy since the 1970s. But also like the way it has become entangled in our own lives, everything. I mean, when we talk about accommodation, so if you have to get a mortgage, you can no longer really get social housing. You have to take out a mortgage, and that's your accommodation. So that, and then when I think we're talking about our solutions, the ultimate aim of them has to be to confront financialization or whatever comes after it if we don't have that solved by then. But we do obviously have to have other solutions in the short to medium term. But I think each of those solutions, when we're coming up with them, I mean, there's, as Gavin kind of mentioned, having a public bank. Some other people have mentioned previously about cooperatives, that some money that is centrally, that we have centrally could go towards funding cooperatives. I mean, there's dealing with the issues in the private rented sector, like rent control or conditions, like having a minimum standard of conditions, or having a tenant deposit protection scheme, or just ensuring that we have the same standards, the same minimum standards across all forms of tenure. So that will be private rented sector, social housing, for accommodation for asylum seekers and for travellers, that wherever you are, you're going to have decent accommodation that lets you reach the rest of your life, of your rights. And I think all of these, when we're doing them, when we're thinking of, is this a good idea or not, we need to be thinking of, right, does this confront finance? Does this confront financialization? Does it bring forward the public, the social, and the ideas of us having a community? And I think that's the only way we're really going to be able to develop sustainable communities, rather than the absolute mess that we have at the moment. Thanks.